Welcome back to Chukitable Media. It is actually a morning time for Nigeria and Nigerians as a whole. I've announced to you the passing of Muhammadu Buhari, the former president of Nigeria, and the reaction of some people and the reaction I got online. I think I've been able to express some to you. Probably some of them you've also seen or you haven't. But if you haven't seen that, I am glad to tell you that people took the death of Buhari with a lot of mixed feelings, a lot of mixed characters interpreted into the life of Muhammadu Buhari, the way he lived his life. And in actual sense, when you look around among people that have ruled Nigeria before, you actually see that Muhammadu Buhari actually stood out of all of them. And the next person in line that has these chances and opportunity is the one they called uh, President Olusegun Obasanjo. These people fed, or Nigerians fed these people, raised them from the cradle and to their grave. They enjoyed everything they need to enjoy from the government. I have a video here from Arise Television making analysis about the character of Muhammadu Buhari, how he lived his life, and the legacy he left behind. It's a long video, so I think you have to settle down a bit to try to see and understand. I am doing this one for the young folks that are coming tomorrow and those people that we want to do research tomorrow to try to know how this man lived his life, who he was, how he lived, and the characterization he put on himself. You would actually enjoy it. Anyway, let me cut the analysis a bit short by announcing to you that the same day that Muhammadu Buhari died, which was yesterday, Sunday, Oba Sikiru Adetona níjẹ̀bú Òde, àwọn náà filẹ̀ ṣe aṣọbora lánàá. Kódà léni ọjọ́ Monday yìí, ó dàbí ẹni wípé a gbọ́ wípé bàbá ti wọlé sùn, ó ti wọ káàlẹ̀ láti lọ sùn. What I'm saying in essence is this, that announcing to you that Oba Sikiru, the Majesty Sikiru Adetona of Ijebu land, also died yesterday, and he's been buried in Ijebu Ode according to Islamic rite. So, nínú fídíò tí mo fẹ́ fi hàn wá yìí, wọ́n ṣe àlàyé ìgbé ayé tí bàbá Síkírù Adétọ̀nà tí wọ́n gbé Awùjalẹ̀ ti ìlú Ìjẹ̀bú tí wọ́n gbé nínú ilé ayé wọn. Iye ọdún tí wọ́n lò tí wọ́n fi wà lórí oyè, ibi tí wọ́n ti ṣe ọmọdé, àti iṣẹ́ tí wọ́n kọ́ nígbà tí wọ́n wà ní ọmọdé, in tó wù wọ́n láti jẹ́ pé kí ó ṣẹlẹ̀ sílùú Nàìjíríà àti kó ṣẹlẹ̀ sí Ìjẹ̀bú land. Gbogbo ẹ̀ pátá ló wà nínú fídíò tí mo fẹ́ fi hàn yìí. Mo fẹ́ kẹ́ jẹ́ ká farabalẹ̀ ká gbọ́ fídíò náà láti Arise Television ni. Mo rí àwọn olóyè tí wọ́n ti wá láti agbègbè sí agbègbè, ní ìletò sí ìletò láti wá ṣe kíni, láti wá ṣe ẹ̀yẹ ìkẹyìn fún bàbá Síkírù Adétọ̀nà. Gẹ́gẹ́ bí a ṣe mọ̀ pé Mùsùlùmí ni bàbá Adétọ̀nà. Bàbá ti jẹ́ ẹni tí wọ́n ti ní èní ní nǹkan bíi aago 4. And I want you to just calm down, watch the video from the beginning to the end, so that at least you can pass this information that you don't know before to the young folks that are coming tomorrow. Baba Sikiru Adetona is dead. He passed on in a very glorious form. He has his own character, and everything was discussed in these videos of mine. I want you to settle down to watch it. This is Chokitable Media. Don't forget to share this video, like it, and subscribe. God bless you as you do. I will stay around there to listen to your comment and see what you have to say about these two men that have just passed on, Muhammadu Buhari and Oba Sikiru Adetona. the Awujale of Ijebu land, the longest serving Oba in the whole Nigeria, is gone now. Let's watch.
And Nigerians across social strata and political leanings have continued to mourn the passing of former President Muhammadu Buhari, who died yesterday at a London hospital after a protracted illness. He was aged 82. President Buhari, who had also served as one of Nigeria's former military rulers, would be buried today at his hometown in Daura, Katsina State. First hinting at his passing, his former media aide Garba Shehu stated in a terse statement yesterday that the former President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, died in a clinic in London. Paying glowing tribute to his late predecessor, President Bola Tinubu described Buhari as a patriot, soldier, and statesman whose legacy of service and sacrifice endures. According to him, the deceased leader confronted corruption head-on throughout his tenure and was always placing the Nigerian nation above personal interest. In addition, the president has also instructed Vice President Kashim Shettima to proceed to the United Kingdom to accompany President Muhammadu Buhari's body back to Nigeria. Tinubu, in the same stroke, has ordered flags to fly at half-mast as a mark of respect for the departed leader. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo has described Buhari as a patriot who tried his best in the quest to give the country the needed progress and development. While former military President General Ibrahim Babangida has described the passage of Buhari as the loss of a symbol. On his part, former President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan has described Buhari as a courageous leader who served the nation with character and a sense of patriotism. Other stakeholders have continued to pay glowing tributes to a man who gave his all to Nigeria. Now, sadly, yesterday was a dark day as the Oba Sikiru Adetona, the Awujale and paramount ruler of Ijebu land, is dead. His death at 91 years, which was announced on Sunday, just hours after the death of former President Muhammadu Buhari, brings to an end a historic 65-year reign at the helm of cultural power across the historic Ijebu land in the heart of Ogun State. He's to be buried at 4 p.m. in Ijebu Ode, according to Islamic rites. With a report on the life and times of him, as well as some insight into what happens next, is Arise News international correspondent Adefemi Akinsoya.
That on a Sunday, the day of rest, a king closed his eyes for the final time. Oba Sikiru Adetona, the Awujale and paramount ruler of Ijebu land, is dead at 91 years. His death comes hours after the passing of former President Muhammadu Buhari, who died in London aged 82. Adetona ascended the throne at 25 years old on April 2nd, 1960, shortly after returning from London, where he was studying accountancy. He became the 50th Awujale after succeeding Daniel Adesoya Belegbua II, who had ruled for the previous 26 years. But when Adetona became king, he remained on the throne for 65 years. He's the longest reigning king in the history of Ijebu land and among the longest reigning in all of Nigeria. Across those 6 decades, he not only witnessed Nigeria become independent from the United Kingdom, but also cemented the cultural leadership that creates an inextricable bond with the people of Ijebu land and beyond. This social contract shines brightest with the growth of the Ojude Oba festival. For many generations of Ijebu people, he is the only king they have ever known. During his time as ruler, Oba Adetona received several Nigerian presidents and national leaders, including former President Goodluck Jonathan, who visited him in 2015, followed by President Muhammadu Buhari in 2016. And in May 2024, President Bola Tinubu honored Awujale with Nigeria's second highest national award, the Grand Commander of the Order of the Niger, in celebration of his 90th birthday. A family man, a beloved husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, Adetona was selected from the Anikinaya ruling house of Ijebu land. Therefore, the next king must emerge from the Fusenbua ruling house. But before any succession plan comes into place, the Adetona burial at 4 p.m. on Monday in Ijebu marks the first transitional ritual of the people's king. Adifemi Akisoya, Arise News.
May the souls of the departed rest in peace, and we send our condolences and wish comfort for their family members, their loved ones, their communities, and the nation at large. Rufai.
I mean, very sad one. I think it was John Donne that said in his famous poem, "Seek not for whom the bells toll, for the bells toll for the death of every man diminishes all of us." Buhari, and President Muhammadu Buhari has run his race. And life is dynamic because as long as you live, you are many things to many people. Some see him as a hero, but some see him otherwise. Those that he called a dot in the circle see him otherwise. Those that he said will treat in the language they understand see him otherwise. That led to the ban of Twitter in this country because people had to report that tweet and it was deleted. And they felt, oh, how would they delete the tweet of a president? Those that were caught in the web of Decree 4 see him otherwise. Omar Diko see him otherwise. The likes of the politicians that were incarcerated after the 83 elections, about 84 when he got in, don't see him as a hero. But some will see him as a disciplined man, anti-corruption hero. But people will also talk about that legacy and say, but people around him were corrupt. So they talk about being above board like Caesar's wife, but people around you are being tried for corruption, also speaks volume. People he incarcerated for political vendetta. People he tried to terminate their lives. The judges in the dead of the night that were harassed, that everybody said, this is an assault on our judiciary. See him otherwise. But those that were close to him say, he's a father. They'd even stretch it and say, the father of the nation. Those that believed in him prior to 2015 felt once he got that mandate, he was going to set Nigeria right. But what heralded is 8 years. Deepening of division, pain, lack of economic gusto and verve, lack of that economic fecundity. And even this current government blames him for the problems they are in now. So with great power comes great responsibility. But do leaders that seek power understand the responsibility, or they just want to be president? Those that see him as a hero will say at least he allowed for fairness in the electoral process. But that argument is also quickly punctured by the fact that he didn't sign the electoral reforms leading up to the 2019 elections where he was going to participate in. But they will also say, at least under him, oppositions could win governorship election. In fact, some governor in the opposition went to thank him. Some will say things like, oh, the electricity bill. Some will also say he did infrastructure, at least if not because of him. We'll not have railway, we'll not have the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, I will not have other infrastructure like that. That he did more thread of roads than anybody. But while we also talk about the rail line, some will also argue, where was there a need for the Kanu-Maradi line? President Buhari, when he ascended the throne in 2015, made the famous words that I am for everybody and for nobody. But some said he was actually for some people. He quoted Shakespeare saying there's a tide in the affairs of man. And we thought he had set the tone for the country he wanted to build. But today, like two sides of a coin, there are two sides to history of President Buhari. There will be those that will say, Veni, vidi, vici.
So?
But there will be those that will say, President Buhari, you caused pain, hurt, division, unfairness, and unkindness. Whatever part you take this morning, please remember something. We will all die. And what will be said after we're gone? I pay tribute to my king, Oba Sikiru Adetona, blessed memories. He did 6 decades there. He did his best to push forward and advance the cause of Ijebu land. Something dear to his heart in his last days was the Ijebu state. Some have argued, do we need more states? Some have said possibly. The argument they even make is that it's only Ijebu land out of the former divisions that didn't get a state in the end. But his legacies are there. I took out time to read his book, his autobiography. He talked about his triumphs, his trials and travails. But one thing you cannot take away from him was that he had a heart for his country. Others might say otherwise because there are two sides to history. But whatever it is, like John Donne says in The Death of Those Both Men today, is that the death of every man diminishes us. We will all die. What will be said about you?
Okay. It was Chilon of Pata in the 17th century, a 7th century philosopher, who said, do not speak ill of the dead. Also in Antigone by Sophocles, written in 431 BC, Antigone, the major lesson from Antigone is that, look, the dead must be honored. And then there is an Italian saying, Do mortuos nili nisi bonum. It also means essentially the same thing. So I begin with that theoretical concept. And also in Africa, people say, do not speak ill of the dead. When a man dies, it is assumed that all the sins of the dead are forgiven. However, while I quote that theoretical background, I have written editorials on Hastings Banda of Malawi, Idi Amin of Uganda, in the course of this career. Sani Abacha, where we said it as it is, because we had no other option. But I think in the case of President Muhammadu Buhari, who died yesterday, 1942, 17 December 1942 to 13 July 2025, it can be said that his legacy is of a mixed character. There are those who love him deeply. There are those who hate him as equally as possible. I think his career can be divided into 3 parts as follows. First, his military career. He was one of those young men, 70 of them, who joined the Nigerian Military Training Company in 1962, I think. He was 19 at the time. And then, of course, it was from there that he was part of the team that was sent to Mons Adeshot in England to be trained as officers. And then he returned as a second lieutenant. It was maybe 2021 at that time. And then, he became part of the Nigerian military. Now, key highlights of his career. During the counter coup of 1966, July counter coup, he was one of the officers who took part in that coup, removing Agunyi Nrusi from power. There are some people who will never forgive him for that. Now, when the Civil War began in 1967, he was in the 1st Division under the command of General Muhammad Shua, one of the finest officers ever to come from the northern part of Nigeria. From the 1st Division, he will later play a big role in the 2nd Division of the same military. And he was part of that team, the Civil War heroes who, well, kept Nigeria safe, kept Nigeria as one, as General General Yakubu Gowon will always say. That to go on with one Nigeria, is the mission. Now, of course, after the Civil War, he was one of those officers who benefited greatly. In 1975, right, he was one of those officers who ended the Gowon administration. He was part of that coup too. And of course, he was rewarded. He has served this country as Federal Commissioner of Works. He has also served as Federal Commissioner in terms of petroleum resources. He has been, in the course of his military career, governor in Borno State. He has also, in the course of that career, been GOC in several brigades. So he distinguished himself as a soldier. In 1983, he was again part of the coup that removed the sitting civilian government of President Shehu Shagari. And he was head of state of Nigeria between 1983 and 1985. So in assessing his legacy, you could look at that face. As head of state, many will remember him for war against indiscipline, but they will also remember him for Decree 2, for Decree 4, his repression of the media. They will remember him for the 59 suitcases that nobody has been able to explain till today. They will remember him for many of the other things that happened within that environment with regard to, was it a 2.8 billion, missing petroleum fund that the likes of a public intellectual and academic, Professor Ayodele Awojobi, focused upon at that time. Now, I'll summarize that first phase. The second phase, of course, you could say will be his involvement in politics. He then showed up in politics. He was part of the founding fathers of the AMPP, the All Nigeria People's Congress, the CPC, and then eventually he was part of the coalition, the All Progressives Congress, that branded him as a military ruler turned Democrat. And then, of course, he was Nigerian president between 2015 and 2019, and also 2019 to 2023, leading the APC. Now, that's very fresh in people's memory, and many will also remember him with regard to Twitter ban, with the restriction of the civic space. The third part of his legacy that I think many will remember will have to be, his involvement also in the politics of Nigeria. Well, if we have to talk about General Buhari, we have to be comprehensive. Now, so the third part will be how he transformed from being a soldier to being a civilian leader and a Democrat. And in that regard also, opinion will be mixed, because we have seen the statement by Sowore. Sowore has nothing to say nicely about him. There will be people like that. But there are also people like Garuba Shehu, who will say nice things. People like John Padden, who wrote the autobiography of Buhari. People like Femi Adesina, who out of loyalty to his boss has also been out there on the air. Now, very quickly, let me go to this second subject. The Ogbagba II of Ijebu land, Oba Sikiru Adetona. Now, he was one of the longest reigning monarchs in Nigerian history. He reigned for 65 years. He got to the throne June 4, I think, yes, June 4, 1960. June 4, 1960, when the Western Nigeria local government wrote to him and said he will be the next Awujale. He was a student of accountancy in England, having attended Uluiwa College, which became Adeola Odutola College. He then went to the UK to study accountancy. He was a student there when he was recalled, and he ascended the throne of his ancestors, having come through the Anikilaya line, the Obanta line, and the Belebua line. So he became, the prince, the young prince. 5 of them contested for that position, but he was the one that was chosen by the kingmakers, the Odis, as they call them within the Oshugbo tradition. And for 65 years, Oba Sikiru Adetona led that throne with charisma, with confidence, and acquired a reputation as one of the monarchs in Nigeria who could be counted for the honesty of his opinion. He feared nobody, perhaps because of the significance of his office. One of the reasons why there was an attempt in 1961, as young as he was, 26 at the time, to make him the president of the Western Region House of Chiefs. But that, of course, went to Oni of Ife then, Adesoji Adereme, But he led his people with great dignity. And in fact, it was under him that Ujudi Oba became a global, international, event. But it was not only Ujudi Oba that you'll be remembered for. Under him, he encouraged young people from Ijebu land, entrepreneurs from Ijebu land. Ijebu land thrived. Ijebu people prospered under his reign. Now, again, some people will say that he's a very stubborn king. It's not in my mouth. It doesn't lie in my mouth to say that. But it's because of his insistence on principles. Many of the big people in Nigeria who tried to intimidate him, no, he refused. One of his dreams was to create an Ijebu state, but he didn't quite succeed with that. Well, I speak with him with very remote familiarity because when his autobiography was written, Awujale, the autobiography of S.K. Adetona, Ogbagba, the second, I was the official reviewer of the book. One of the things that struck me in the book was the extent with which he documented his disagreement with people, even with his own blood brother. Yeah. I looked at the book. I called, I think it was published by Mr. Musuru Publishers. I called Mr. Musuru. I said, why is this man writing like this? And you allowed him to just be attacking people in his, he said, you don't know the man. It's what he wants to say that he says so. So he was that kind of person, who was very forthright, and he didn't arrange his mind to express his views. So we commiserate with the people of Ijebu land, the people of Ogun State, and everyone, who were very close to Kabiyesi. The other time I met him at close range was when I was running for the deputy governorship position, and we went to see him. Of course, that's the nature of politics, with Senator Buriji Kashamu, now of blessed memory. And he received us very well. He was the father of all. His door was open to everybody. So the Ijebu people will miss him greatly. The Ogun State people will miss him greatly. And Nigeria will also miss this revered monarch, one of those who could speak truth to power and not go and queue up at Aso Rock looking for opportunities.
Absolutely. There are 2 icons to memorialize today, and all for different purposes, for different reasons, and leaving different sentiments in people's hearts and in people's minds. I focus on the former president, Muhammadu Buhari, whose legacy is ultimately going to be that of a paradox. The man who was known as a patriot who loved his nation so much, but ultimately was criticized for not being pan-Nigerian enough. And that paradox followed him to his last breath as he joined the likes of Robert Mugabe and Edgar Lungu, who unfortunately passed away in foreign hospitals. Unlike the group of Nelson Mandela, Sam Nujoma, Kenneth Kaunda, who, when they took their last breaths in hospitals, they chose hospitals in their own countries. However, there's so much to document in the life because I continue to say that it was a life well lived, it was a full life. He's somebody who was able to fulfill all of his dreams. I mean, only two people in this nation, in this great nation, have been able to rise to the helm of affairs twice at different parts of their careers. So yes, as much as it is sad for those close to him who love him, it's also important to acknowledge the fact that I believe the man was able to achieve a good proportion of his goals. Now, some are writing about him as a reformist, and sincerely, we must give credit where credit is due. One of his greatest legacies, I think, will lie in the electoral reforms of 2022. Now, as much as this is not yet a perfect situation, and some might argue that he should have done it in his first term, and, besides pushing it forward to the second term, the truth is that the electoral reform has created a pathway for us to be able to start developing our elections and start furthering and deepening our democracy. The PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, again, the criticism would say that he pushed it forward to become the burden of his successor. However, he was bold enough to be able to implement that PIA. During his time, yes, he was able to increase the fuel price by 100%. But one thing that many people continue to talk about is the immense goodwill that President Buhari had. It's almost as though we have not seen the level of goodwill that he experienced as he came into office in 2015, and even throughout his tenure. There was a deep sense of patience for a large part of his tenure in office. People were understanding. There was very little pushing back, which is why now you see where we are, is that people are pushing back because they feel that, well, we were extremely patient and we gave a lot of goodwill to President Buhari, but after 8 years, what did it culminate in? And that's why people are pushing back sooner than they did during that time. But again, we go back to some of the positive developments of his legacy. We look at the revolution that took place in the digital identity systems. We saw the introduction of NIN, BVN, the digital economy, tech we saw great investments in the tech industry as well, and tech started moving forward and taking shape and bringing in young Nigerians. However, in the same breath, we also saw the ban on Twitter. So the paradox applies in many ways. Now, he's one of the group of presidents who found themselves thrown into the global crisis that was COVID-19. While many people might look back and say, when you look at the casualty numbers, the number of people who died, the number of people who were impacted by COVID directly as a health concern in Nigeria, you might say that Nigeria went a long way in being able to manage the pandemic, because if you remember, there had been predictions. People had said that, once COVID gets to Nigeria, people will be dying on the sides of the streets. Yes, some people might say that it was due to environment or due to diet and so forth, but we also have to give credit for the management of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, what then happened afterwards? Where was the transparency with some of those funds? Where was the transparency with the palliatives? So the paradox continues there. Of course, the one that sticks sorely in so many people's minds is End SARS. I was reading so many experiences yesterday of those who participated in End SARS and what their life has been since that protest of 2020. Some who are stuck overseas, some who still live in fear because of all that transpired during that period. Many will still tell you there was no justice. What transpired? How could that have happened in this country? I remember hearing the sound of gunshots. I remember all of it. I remember the 24-hour curfew that came after, the spirit of fear around it. And we asked ourselves, was this really the best way to manage a protest against police brutality? So that lies there in President Buhari's legacy. Now, when we think of the judiciary, of course, we cannot go on without speaking of the suspension of Justice Walter Onogen and what many people called the coup against constitutionality. It had never been done before. A chief justice being suspended, and the way the case was handled, and the fact that the president came out and announced it. However, many people will still come out and say that he was disciplined, he was forthright, and he was a man who stood by principle. He was a man who came in on a wave of anti-corruption sentiment because they felt that only he had the strength and the power to clamp down. But his supporters will tell you that, unfortunately, to get to power, he had to mix in the business of politics, and so the people around him continued to do what he called the business of politics. But in all of this, we continue to say that it's important to remember the positive legacy that was left by Sai Baba, Mae Gaskia.
Okay. Quick information as regards the Awujale. Message coming out of the family says he will be laid to rest at the Ogbagba Court, Igbegba, on Monday, July 14th at 4 p.m. today. That's some information coming out of the Awujale from the family, and all guests are kindly requested to proceed to the Ogbagba Court, where condolences will also be received. We appreciate you for your prayers and support at this time. This is signed by Prince Awujale Adetona for the family.
Thank you for watching. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing so you won't miss out any of our latest videos.